Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we journey to the heart of the ancient Sahel, to the great dust-hued walled city of Kano. As the sun sinks, painting the mud-brick ramparts in shades of gold and umber, the air cools and fills with the scent of spices, wood smoke, and something else. An anticipation, for in the squares and open spaces, a different kind of prayer is about to begin. We are not here for the call of the muezzin, though that too is a song in the air. We are here for an older song, a physical hymn. We have come to witness the fire eaters. But let us be clear from the start. These are not mere entertainers. They are not jugglers of flame. They are something far more profound. They are adepts, keepers of a covenant. Their bodies are the temples where an impossible conversation takes place, dialogue with the very element of transformation. To swallow fire is not a trick of the eye. It is a feat of the spirit. It is an act of faith so complete that it temporarily rewrites the laws of nature. Not through defiance, but through deep, respectful agreement. These traditions, woven into the very fabric of Kano's history, stretch back through generations. The practice is more than a spectacle. It's a living library of cultural memory. Each flicker of the torch tells a story of survival, of community, and of a deep spiritual connection to the forces that shape our world. The fire itself is seen not as a destructive force, but as a cleansing and life-giving element. It is a source of light, warmth, and protection. To engage with it so intimately is to honor its power. To show that humanity can coexist with even the most fearsome aspects of nature through understanding and reverence. Over the next while, we will follow a master bellow through the 3 days of fasting that hollow his body to make room for spirit. This period of purification is crucial. It's not just about abstaining from food. It's about clearing the mind, focusing the will, and preparing the physical vessel for a sacred encounter. The body must become a clean slate, receptive and resilient. Bello will speak of this process not as a hardship, but as a necessary shedding of the mundane world to step into the spiritual. It is during this time that he connects with the generations of masters who came before him, drawing strength from their legacy. We will enter the secretive workshop where sacred oils are blended from shea butter and whispered ingredients, creating a fleeting peace treaty with the flame. This is where science and spirit intertwine. The exact formula is a closely guarded secret, passed down from master to apprentice. Each ingredient has a purpose, a story. Some are for protection, coating the mouth and throat. Others are symbolic, meant to appease the spirit of the fire. The mixing is a ritual in itself, performed with chants and quiet concentration. The scent in this small room is intoxicating, earthy, medicinal, and ancient. It is the aroma of magic being made tangible. We will feel the electric tension of the performance square, where the audience's collective belief becomes part of the protective magic. The crowd is not a passive observer. Their energy, their focus, their shared gasp of awe all contribute to the atmosphere of the rite. Bello says he can feel their belief like a shield around him. It is a communal act of faith. Children watch with wide, unbelieving eyes, while elders nod with the quiet understanding of those who have seen this mystery unfold many times before. The drumming that accompanies the performance is the heartbeat of the community, rising and falling with the dance of the flames. And we will witness the most solemn rite of all, the day the fire whispers a warning, and the master knows it is time to bury his torches and become a teacher who never performs again. This is a moment of profound transition. It is not a failure, but a culmination. The fire communicates in its own language, a flicker that lasts too long, a heat that bites too sharply. The master must be attuned enough to hear this warning. To ignore it is to invite disaster. Accepting this message is the ultimate act of respect for the element he has communed with for so long. His role then shifts from performer to guardian, ensuring the tradition continues safely and with the sanctity it deserves. This is a story about boundaries, not the walls of a city, but the delicate, living boundaries between the human and the elemental. It is about courage rooted not in bravado, but in purity of intent. So, let the cool evening air settle around you. Listen to the distant sounds of the city, and prepare to step into a world where performance is prayer, and where a man can hold a conversation with destruction, and come away transformed, not consumed. You are now under Baobab skies. Have you ever witnessed something so astounding, so seemingly impossible, that it left you questioning the very limits of human capability? A performance that felt less like a trick and more like a sacred ritual unfolding before your very eyes. Today, we journey into the heart of such a mystery, to understand a performer known as the Fire Eater. But what you're about to discover is that for this artist, the spectacle doesn't begin with a flaming torch. It begins with an emptiness, a profound, deliberate hollowing out of the self to make space for the impossible. This is the story of Bello and his journey into the flame. Our story begins 3 days before he is set to perform in the bustling Kofa Matter Square. The world is still asleep. The sky is a deep, rich indigo, punctured by the last few defiant stars. Bello rises before the first call to prayer echoes through the city. In the quiet solitude of his courtyard, he begins his ablutions. The water is cool against his skin. Each movement is unhurried, imbued with intention. He is not just washing his hands, his face, his feet. He is washing his mind, his spirit, purifying his very purpose for what is to come. This is where the true preparation begins, with a fast, but this is no ordinary fast. Its rules are absolute, its purpose sacred. For the next 72 hours, no solid food will pass his lips. His only sustenance will be water, and not just any water. This is water that has been left to rest overnight in a porous clay pot, allowing it to absorb the cool, grounding energy of the earth itself. Into this water, he adds 3 thin slivers of peeled ginger and a single, fragrant leaf of mint. This simple, pure concoction will be his sole source of nourishment. It is a recipe of purification, designed to cleanse the body and sharpen the spirit. Imagine Bello now, a man in his prime, sitting in the stillness of his courtyard as dawn breaks. A simple clay cup of water rests before him. His back is straight, his eyes are closed. His face is a mask of serene introspection. This isn't an act of self-denial or punishment. It is an act of creation, of making space. Bello thinks of his body as a zor, the traditional Hausa reception hall. For a distinguished guest to feel welcome, the hall must be clean, uncluttered, and ready. If his body, his personal zor, is filled with the heavy, dense energies of everyday food, of millet, meat, and oil, there would be no room for the volatile, noble guest he is preparing to invite. Fire, you see, is not just an element to be manipulated. In his world, it is a spirita, fierce, powerful, and respected entity. And such a spirit would never deign to enter a space that is crowded and mundane. So, the fast is essential. It is the sweeping of the temple. It lightens the physical vessel, allowing the spiritual one to expand, to become vast and receptive. As the hours turn into a day, his life continues, but it takes on a different quality. It becomes attenuated, refined. He moves with a deliberate economy of motion, each gesture purposeful. He speaks less, conserving his energy, his breath. He consciously avoids the heat of arguments and the strain of heavy labor. He is creating an inner sanctuary of peace. On that first afternoon, The familiar pangs of hunger arrive. They are like distant thunder on a clear day. But Bello does not fight them. He doesn't resist or resent them. He simply acknowledges their presence, observes them with a detached curiosity, and lets them pass. These pangs are not a sign of weakness. They are a confirmation, they are proof that the ordinary world, with its physical demands and earthly cravings, is beginning to recede. It is making way for the extraordinary. The clutter is being cleared. The space is being made. With his body quieting down, his mind turns inward. His focus shifts to the nature of his coming guest. Fire, in Hausa water. He meditates on its dual nature. He thinks of the fire in the hearth, the water gida, the fire of the home. This is the friendly, useful fire that cooks his family's food, that provides warmth on a cool night. It's the same fire that lives in the blacksmith's forge, the creative flame that shapes raw iron into essential tools like the hoe and the knife. It is a partner in civilization, a force for creation and sustenance. But he also meditates on its other face, the Harshan Wuta, literally the tongue of fire. This is the wild, untamable flame that can consume a season's harvest in minutes. The destructive tongue that speaks only in annihilation and leaves only ash in its wake. Bello's goal is not to conquer this destructive aspect. He is not a dominator, he is a diplomat. His quest is to connect with the friendly, transformative spirit of the Watagida. He seeks to gently remind this spirit of its true, creative nature and, with the utmost respect, to ask its permission for a most intimate visit to enter his own body, his own sacred space. The first day of the fast is a day of settling, of his body and mind adjusting to this new state of being. The noise of the world begins to fade. The second day brings a deepening quiet. The external world becomes a blur, and his internal landscape becomes sharp and clear. The hunger is no longer a guest. It is a ghost, a memory. His senses feel heightened, attuned to the subtle energies around him. By the dawn of the third day, a peculiar lightness permeates his entire being. It is not the weakness of starvation, it is a feeling of transparency, as if he could see right through his own skin to the core of his spirit. His stomach is an empty vessel, a silent cavern, but his spirit feels full, vibrant, and incredibly alert. It is poised on the edge of anticipation, waiting. The Zor, his inner reception hall, has been swept clean. The floors have been polished. The threshold has been blessed and prepared. The mundane has been banished, and the sacred has been invoked. Now, and only now, with the temple purified and the space made holy, can the specific work of invitation truly begin. He will start with the one thing that connects the physical and the spiritual, the bridge between his world and the world of the flame. He will begin with the breath, the very breath that is about to become the shared language between man and fire. The emptiness he has cultivated is not a void. It is a potential, a sacred space humming with readiness. The performance in Kofamata Square is still hours away, but for Bello, the true art, the deep magic, has already reached its crescendo in the silence of his own being. He has become the hollow reed through which a spirit can sing. The fire is coming, and he is ready. The temple was now clear, and the real preparation could begin. Bello needed to learn the language of his guest, the fire itself. For him, this language was breath. On the second morning of his fast, he started the Eskoki, the ancient wind exercises his master, Malam Ibrahim, had taught him. These were techniques passed down through generations of masters. He sat on a simple reed mat in his courtyard, his back perfectly straight. He rested his hands on his knees, palms facing up, open and receptive to the world. He closed his eyes, and the journey inward began. The first exercise was designed for cooling. He drew in a slow, deep breath through his nose, imagining the cool, silver light of the dawn filling his lungs. He pictured this light pooling in his chest, creating a serene lake of moonlight. He held this breath for a count of 7 heartbeats, allowing the coolness to permeate his being. Then he exhaled slowly through pursed lips, visualizing a stream of warm, grey air leaving his body. With it went all the accumulated inner heat of worry, agitation, and fear. This was the breath of release, a letting go of all that troubled the mind and spirit. The second exercise was for alignment. This time, as he inhaled, he didn't picture coolness, but a gentle, golden warmth, like the comforting glow of a friendly hearth fire. He drew this warmth down, past his throat, deep into the very pit of his empty stomach. He held it there, not as a scorching coal, but as a contained, radiant sun, a source of inner power. Then, with a sharp, controlled "ha" sound, he expelled the breath forcefully through his open mouth. This was the breath of the forge, the breath that claimed kinship with the element of fire. The goal wasn't to become hot, but to resonate with the frequency of heat, to understand its rhythm and its nature. For hours each day, Bello cycled through these breaths. The cooling breath, the breath of the forge, over and over. The Iskoki were far more than just a physical preparation. They were a complete recalibration of his entire being. He was teaching his nervous system a new and profound truth, that fire was not an enemy to be feared and flinched from, but a relative, akin to be greeted with steady lungs and an open heart. The fast had carved out an empty space within him. Now the breath was beginning to fill that space with the correct energy, the precise vibration needed to harmonize with the flame. He also spent time meditating on stories. He recalled his master's tales of the great fire eaters of the past, men who could extinguish a burning torch in their mouths, and then, moments later, relight it from a glowing ember held on their own tongue. He contemplated the deep philosophical core of these legends. Fire transforms. It has always been the great agent of change. It transforms raw food into life-giving nourishment, soft, pliable metal into hard, durable tools, and dead wood into essential light and warmth. The fire eater sought to undergo a similar transformation, not to be destroyed by the flame, but to be proven by it, to demonstrate that a human spirit, when properly prepared and disciplined, could interface directly with this awesome transformative power and become an agent of it, not just another of its victims. Let's just pause for a moment and picture this scene. Imagine that quiet courtyard, bathed in the soft morning light. The only sounds are the rhythmic, controlled hiss of Bello's breath and the distant, muted hum of the city waking up. The physical work he's doing seems minimal, almost non-existent. He is perfectly still. But the inner work, the work happening inside his mind and spirit, is immense. Bello is constructing a bridge. Not of wood or stone, but a bridge within himself. Each deliberate breath is another plank laid securely in place, spanning the vast chasm between human vulnerability and elemental power. He isn't gathering strength to fight the fire. That would be a fool's errand. Instead, he is cultivating a profound stillness, a deep inner quiet that will allow him to converse with it, to understand its language. The emptiness of his stomach from the fast and the focused discipline of his lungs are weaving together the very first layer of this sacred covenant between man and fire. This is the hidden, patient work of the true practitioner. It's not about spectacle, not yet. It's about foundation. It's about changing oneself from the inside out to become a vessel, worthy of a dangerous and sacred art. The world sees the performance, the final act of swallowing the flame. But the artist, the practitioner, knows that the real magic, the real transformation, happens here, in the silent, dedicated hours before the fire is ever lit. It happens in the quiet courtyard, with nothing but the breath and the will to guide the way. As the days of the fast continued, Bello's body grew lighter, but his senses grew sharper. The world seemed to vibrate with a new clarity. The scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden, the call of a distant bird, the very texture of the air on his skin, everything was amplified. His internal world was becoming as quiet and vast as the desert at night. The constant chatter of the mind, the everyday anxieties that plague us all, had faded into a respectful silence. He continued his practice. The breath of release, washing away any flicker of doubt. The breath of the forge, stoking the inner sun in his core. He was no longer just a man sitting on a mat. He was becoming a finely tuned instrument, his body and mind being brought into perfect harmony. He was learning to listen not with his ears, but with his entire being. He was listening for the song of the fire, a song that had been playing since the dawn of time. He knew that to perform this art, he couldn't just mimic the actions. He had to embody the principle. He had to become a living paradox, a being of flesh and water who could welcome fire as a friend. The stories his master told him echoed in his mind, not as mere tales, but as instructional manuals. The fire eater who walked on hot coals didn't have tough skin. He had a mind that did not register pain in the same way. The one who held an ember on his tongue didn't have a fireproof mouth. He had a spirit that had made peace with the flame's essence. This is what Bello was striving for. Not a physical immunity, but a spiritual alignment. He was preparing not to conquer fire, but to be accepted by it. And so he sat, and he breathed, and he waited, allowing the ancient wisdom of the Iskoki to remake him, one breath at a time, into the man who could welcome the flame. The third and final day of the fast was a day of inward pilgrimage. Bello moved through his few, light tasks like a sleepwalker, his focus entirely internal. The hunger was a distant hum now, a background note to the symphony of preparation that had been building for days. His body felt hollowed out, but in that emptiness he found a new kind of clarity, a space for something sacred to enter. The physical world seemed to fade, its colors muted, its sounds muffled. Everything was pointing inward, a slow, deliberate journey into the depths of his own consciousness. That evening, after the Moghreb prayer, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, he performed a final, thorough cleansing. This was more than just washing away the dust of the day. It was a ritual ablution, a symbolic purification of the body to match the purity of the spirit he had cultivated through fasting and meditation. Every drop of water felt like it was washing away not just grime, but doubt, anxiety, and the mundane concerns of everyday life. He was preparing his body as a temple, a vessel worthy of the immense power he was about to invite. He then lay down on his sleeping mat, not for ordinary rest, but for the final and most crucial test, the dream of embers. This wasn't something you could force. It was a surrender. This was a central part of the ancient tradition. The covenant with the fire, the sacred agreement he sought to renew, was not a one-sided human endeavor. It wasn't about man conquering nature or bending the elements to his will. It required a sign, a permission granted from the realm of spirit and symbol. The dream was the liminal space, the bridge between worlds where that permission was sought and, if one was worthy, received. It could also be denied. Failure in the dream meant the ritual could not proceed. It meant the practitioner was not yet ready, that the harmony between the physical and the spiritual was not yet complete. He lay in the quiet darkness of his small room, the sounds of the village settling down for the night, filtering in from outside. He began the practice of the cooling breath. an ancient technique designed to calm the nervous system and lower the body's temperature. Inhale, slow and deep, through the nose. Exhale, even slower, through pursed lips, as if cooling a hot drink. With each cycle, he felt his body grow heavier, sinking into the mat, his limbs turning to lead. Yet, as his body relaxed, his mind became extraordinarily lucid, sharp and clear, like a polished crystal. In this state of profound stillness, he set his intention. It wasn't a prayer or a wish, but a focused declaration projected from the core of his being. He wasn't asking, he was stating his purpose: to meet the fire in its dream form, to stand before its essence, and to understand its will. With the intention set firmly in his mind, a single, unwavering point of light in the darkness, he finally released his grip on consciousness and let sleep take him. The dream came, not as a chaotic jumble of images, but as a vivid and coherent reality. He found himself standing at the edge of the familiar village square, the place where the ceremony would be held. But it was different. It was utterly empty, silent as a tomb, and bathed in a soft, sourceless twilight that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. There was no sun, no moon, only this gentle, ethereal glow. In the exact center of the square burned a single, steady flame. It was not on a torch or in a pit. It simply was. A pillar of pure fire about his own height, burning cleanly without any visible fuel and producing no smoke. It was a perfect, self-sustaining manifestation of the element. This was the moment of truth. In the strange logic of the dream, he knew precisely what he had to do. There was no confusion, no hesitation. He began to walk towards the flame, his bare feet making no sound on the dusty ground. As he approached, he paid meticulous attention to his sensations, for they were the language of this encounter. Did he feel a scorching wave of heat pushing him back? That would be a warning, a clear no. It would mean the fire found him intrusive, that his presence was unwelcome. Did he feel his dream skin prickle with a primal panic, an instinct to flee? That would be a sign of his own unresolved fear, an indication that he was not yet pure enough in spirit. It would mean not yet, but as he drew nearer, the air remained cool and still. The flame radiated, not heat, but a gentle, golden warmth, like the soft touch of the sun on a mild spring day. It was inviting, not threatening. He came to a stop just a few feet before it. The fire did not roar or crackle. It hummed, a low, pleasant vibration that resonated deep within his chest, a sound you felt more than you heard. He understood this instantly. This was the voice of the friendly fire, the Watagida, the spirit of the domestic hearth, the fire that cooks and warms, the fire that protects. It was a sound of welcome, of recognition. He reached out his dream hand, slowly, deliberately. He did not plunge it into the column of light. Instead, he let his fingers brush the very edge of the luminous form. The sensation was extraordinary. It felt like dipping his hand into warm, liquid, honey-thick, smooth, and deeply nourishing. There was no pain, no burning, only a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. It was a feeling of complete acceptance, a communion that transcended words. He stood there for a timeless interval, his hand resting at the boundary of the flame, in silent conversation. He wasn't thinking in words, but in feelings, in pure being. He felt the history of the fire, its ancient connection to his people, its role as both a tool and a sacred entity. He felt his own lineage, the generations of his family who had honored this covenant. In this moment, he was not just Bello, he was a link in an unbroken chain stretching back into the mists of time. Then, the flame began to change. It slowly dimmed, its brilliant light contracting, not vanishing into nothing, but condensing. It shrank from a tall pillar into a single, large ember, glowing with a soft, internal light. This ember then floated gently from where the flame had been, drifting through the twilight air towards him. It came to rest, now cool and dark, in the palm of his outstretched hand. It felt solid, smooth, and weighty, like a special stone. He closed his fingers around it, holding it tight. He awoke with a start, his body jerking as if from a fall. The first faint call to Fajr, the dawn prayer, echoed from the distant mosque. Darkness still filled his room, but it was the thin, grey darkness that precedes the dawn. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from the sheer intensity of the experience. His hand was clenched in a tight fist at his side. He opened it slowly, half expecting to see the ember resting there. Of course, his palm was empty, but it tingled with a distinct memory of warmth, and his entire being was flooded with a serene, unshakable certainty. The dream had been favorable. The covenant was strong. The fire had welcomed him in the silent, profound language of symbols. The emptiness he had cultivated, the focused breath, the unwavering intental, had been accepted. He rose from his mat, his body feeling impossibly light, as if he could float. His spirit was full to overflowing, brimming with a quiet joy and a profound sense of peace. The temple of his body was ready. The honored guest, the spirit of the fire, had sent its consent. All that remained was the final anointing of the vessel, and then the performance itself, the living proof of a conversation agreed upon in the world of dreams. The journey inward was complete. Now the journey outward could begin. With the dream's blessing secured, the preparation moved from the internal to the deeply personal and secretive. The day before the performance, Bello left his home. He walked through the winding, narrow streets of old Kano, the air thick with the sounds and smells of the city. His path led him away from the bustling markets, into a quieter quarter where the high mud walls seemed to hold echoes of centuries past. His destination was a nondescript doorway, a simple opening in one of those ancient walls. This was the workshop and home of his master, Malam Ibrahim. Pushing the leather-hinged door open, Bello stepped into a different world. A small, shaded courtyard welcomed him, a sanctuary from the vibrant chaos outside. The air here was still and carried a complex perfume, the familiar scent of dust, the sharp, dry aroma of herbs, and the rich, nutty fragrance of shea butter. It was a smell that Bello associated with wisdom, magic, and a deep connection to the earth. Malam Ibrahim was waiting. The old man, his beard like a cascade of white cotton, and his eyes holding the knowing stillness of deep water, sat on a low stool beside a small charcoal brazier. A thin wisp of smoke curled upwards. He saw Bello and nodded, a silent, profound acknowledgement. It was a greeting that said everything that needed to be said. The dream has been reported. It was good, and now the final preparations can begin. Bello stood respectfully, a student in the presence of his master, watching as the ritual unfolded. The sacred oils, the protective unguent for the fire eater, were not something made in bulk and stored on a shelf. They couldn't be. Their power was alive, immediate. They were mixed fresh, for each performance, by a master for his active student. This act was as much a part of the performance as the fire itself. It was a transfer of energy, of knowledge, a passing of guardianship from one generation to the next. Malam Ibrahim gestured to a collection of items arranged meticulously on a clean white cloth beside him. There was a bowl of ivory white sea butter, several small leather pouches containing dried herbs, and a well-worn mortar and pestle. Each item held a purpose, a story, a specific power. The master began with the foundation. He pointed to the bowl of pure, unrefined Shabata Kadania. It was smooth, almost glowing in the soft light of the courtyard. This is the earth's own fat. Malam Ibrahim sighed, his voice a soft, raspy whisper, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. It is cool, patient, nurturing. It is the foundation. It tells the fire it touches that this is the body of the earth. He scooped a generous amount into a shallow ceramic bowl, the butter yielding softly under his experienced fingers. This was the base, the carrier, the cooling embrace that would stand between Bello's flesh and the flame. Next came the herbs. Malam Ibrahim took a small pouch and carefully poured some of its contents into the mortar. It was a fine green powder crushed from dried bagarua leaves. Bagarua, he explained, is known for its cooling properties. It is what our mothers use to soothe a child's fever. It brings coolness from the plant world. He ground it further, the pestle making a soft, rhythmic sound against the stone. Then he added a reddish dust from another pouch kawasa bark. Kawasa is for protection. It tightens the skin, makes it strong, a natural shield. It is an astringent that tells the skin to be firm. These two ingredients were common knowledge, things any herbalist in Kano might know and use. They were the public face of the protective magic. But then came the secret. Malam Ibrahim set aside the mortar and pestle and reached for a small, sealed gourd. It was old, smooth from years of handling. With a deliberate motion, he uncorked it and tipped it over his palm. A fine, silvery grey powder trickled out. It seemed to shimmer, to catch the light in a way that was almost otherworldly. "This," he said, holding his hand up for Bello to see, his voice dropping even lower, "this is the heart of the matter. Kura na Zango, the dust of the termite mound." But this was not dust from just any mound found in the bush. This was from a specific, ancient mound, one that the sun's rays never touched directly. It was a mound known only to the masters of this art, passed down through generations. And the dust was not just scraped from the surface. It was dug from its deepest, coolest core. It was believed that this material, this Kora Nazango, held the earth's constant, cool breath. It was a mineral memory of eternal darkness and damp, living soil. This was the ingredient that truly spoke to the fire. It told the flame a story not of vulnerable flesh, but of the deep, unburnable earth itself. It was the key to the illusion, the core of the covenant between man and fire. With all the physical components gathered, the final and most crucial element was added, the spiritual. As Malam Ibrahim began to combine the shea butter and the powdered herbs and dust in the ceramic bowl, he began to chant. It wasn't a loud proclamation, but a low, continuous murmur under his breath. The words were not verses from the Quran, they were older. Whispers from a time before, phrases that called to the benevolent spirits of the earth and the air. He spoke to the jinn of the wind and the guardians of the soil, asking for their protection, affirming the ancient covenant. The mixing was not just a physical act, it was a prayer made tangible. His gnarled, strong fingers worked the mixture with a slow, kneading rhythm. He folded the ingredients together, his thumbs pressing and turning, his movements hypnotic. With each fold, each press, he was folding the prayers into the unguent. He was imbuing the simple paste with spiritual power, with the authority of his lineage, and with the force of his own will. Bello watched, mesmerized. He could almost see the energy flowing from his master's hands into the bowl, transforming the earthly materials into a supernatural shield. The scent in the courtyard intensified, a potent blend of herb, earth, and something else, something ancient and powerful. Finally, Malam Ibrahim stopped. He held the bowl up, examining the finished ointment. It was a smooth, greyish-green paste. To an outsider, it would look like a simple herbal bomb, but to Bello, it was everything. It was tradition, it was protection. It was the physical manifestation of his master's blessing and the earth's own power. Malam Ibrahim looked at Bello, his deep eyes seeming to peer right into his soul. The body is prepared, he said. The rest is with you. Your spirit must be as cool as this cream. Your heart must be as steady as the earth from which it came. Do not fear the fire. It is your partner. You have made a pact. Honor it. He handed the bowl to Bello. The ceramic was still cool to the touch. Bello took it with both hands, bowing his head in a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. He would apply this ointment just before his performance, anointing his mouth, his throat, and his hands. It was his armor. Holding it, he felt a calm settle over him. The nervous energy he had felt earlier was replaced by a quiet confidence. The dream had given him permission. His master had given him the tools. Now, all that was left was to walk into the circle of light and dance with the flames. As the mixture finally coalesced into a smooth, greyish paste, Malam Ibrahim paused his chanting. He stopped stirring the concoction in the small clay bowl and looked over at Bello. His eyes were sharp, focused, carrying the weight of generations of knowledge. "You understand what this is?" he asked, and it wasn't the first time he'd asked this question. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a teaching moment, a lesson repeated over and over until the truth sank past the level of mere thought and settled deep into the foundation of belief. Bello, ever the dutiful student, replied with the same words he always used. "It is protection, master." It was the obvious answer, the one anyone would give. But it was the wrong one. Malam Ibrahim shook his head slowly, a gesture of gentle correction, not of disappointment. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Protection is a wall. It's a barrier you put up against an enemy. But a wall can be breached. A wall can be burned right through if the fire is angry enough." He dipped a finger into the bowl, lifting it to show Bello the slick, grey paste clinging to his skin. "This," he said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent tone, "is a greeting. It is a diplomat. It is a translator." He began to explain the philosophy behind the sacred oil, the same way it had been explained to him by his own master and his master before him. "The human mouth and throat," he said, "are wet, warm, and organic. They are everything that fire desires to consume. To approach a force like fire with a shield, with something that screams protection, is to declare war. And fire is a formidable warrior, one you do not want to challenge head-on, but to approach it with something that changes the very nature of the conversation. That," he explained, "is wisdom. It's about understanding, not confrontation." The camera zooms in on Malam Ibrahim's finger, the light catching the unusual, slick texture of the greyish sacred oil. His other hand gestures gracefully as he explains its symbolic function to an attentive Bello, whose eyes are wide with a mixture of awe and dawning comprehension. "The shea butter," Malam Ibrahim continued, "is slick, like water thrown on a hot stone. It makes the flame skid, it encourages it to slide past rather than linger. It's the first layer of the message, a simple physical property that speaks a language the fire understands. The herbs we ground into it," he went on, "they whisper coolness. They sing a song of dew and shade, a counter-melody to the fire's heat." He paused, letting the words sink in before revealing the most crucial component. "But the termite dust." He touched the paste-coated finger to his own tongue for a brief moment, then quickly spat to the side in a well-practiced ritual gesture. It wasn't for taste. It was an act of respect, an acknowledgement of the power he was about to describe. The termite dust is what truly speaks. It says to the flame, "You are not touching animal. You are not touching flesh and blood. You are touching stone. You are touching the deep, silent bone of the earth." He looked at Bello intently. Fire does not eat stone. It licks it. It warms it. It dances upon it, but it does not consume it. This oil, for those crucial few moments of the performance, convinces the flame that it is touching something ancient and inedible. It is a lie, yes, but it is a lie of the highest truth, a truth about respect and understanding the nature of the elements. The alchemy, then, was not one of chemistry, but of perception. The sacred oil did not make Bello's flesh fireproof in the way modern science would understand it. It couldn't stop a blowtorch. Instead, it altered the fire's perception of his flesh. It was a psychological intervention on an elemental level, an intricate negotiation based on a deep, ancestral understanding of the fire's nature, its desires, its rules. It was a respectful trick, a benevolent deception that was agreed upon long ago in the dream covenant between the first fire eaters and the spirit of the flame itself. The fire, in its elemental intelligence, would recognize the code. It would sense the cool earth's signature carried in the termite dust, and for the duration of the performance, it would play along. It would moderate its own hunger, honoring the agreement. This, Malam Ibrahim explained, was the true reason the oils were kept secret. It wasn't merely to guard a trade secret or to maintain a monopoly on a performance. It was to guard the belief in the system itself. The magic was not just in the ingredients, but in the unwavering faith of the performer and the mystique held by the audience. If everyone knew the trick, if the process was demystified and broken down into simple components, the collective faith that was so essential to the performance would be weakened. The awe would fade, the respect would diminish. The mystery was a fundamental part of the magic. The secret was the sacred seal on the covenant. To lose the secret was to risk breaking the pact. It was to risk the fire forgetting its promise and remembering only its hunger. The oil was more than a tool. It was a physical manifestation of a spiritual agreement. It was a prayer made tangible, a story told not with words, but with butter, herbs, and the dust of the earth. It was the key that turned the lock between the world of man and the world of the elemental, allowing for a brief, breathtaking moment of communion, where a man could hold a conversation with a living flame and walk away unharmed. This was the legacy Bello was inheriting, not a trick, but a truth. Not a shield, but a handshake. A profound and delicate peace treaty, mixed by hand in a small clay bowl. Malam Ibrahim finished the mixture, scraping every last bit from the bowl into a small, lidded calabash. He handed it to Bello with both hands, a solemn, significant transfer. "The earth goes with you," he intoned, his voice low and steady. Bello accepted the calabash, his hands cradling it as if it contained a fragment of the moon itself. He carried it home with the utmost care, his mind already racing with the gravity of what was to come. That night, sleep was a fleeting visitor. Bello tossed and turned, the anticipation a live current running through him. Long before the true dawn, in that ethereal moment when the world is suspended between night and day, he rose. It was time. The application ritual had to begin at this precise, liminal hour. He moved with a quiet purpose, his actions deliberate and filled with reverence. He washed his hands and face with cool, clear water, the shock of it sharpening his senses. He then sat on a simple mat, positioning himself to face east, towards the direction where the sun, the great firebringer, would soon make its ascent. With steady hands, he opened the calabash. The paste inside had firmed slightly overnight, but he knew it would melt at the touch of his skin. Using the middle finger of his right hand, the finger of balance, as tradition dictated, he scooped a small, precise amount. His expression was one of deep, unwavering focus, as if he were performing a sacred ablution, a holy cleansing before a momentous event. He began with his lips, coating them in a thin, even layer. He felt an immediate, slightly numbing coolness from the herbs, a sensation that was both strange and reassuring. Then, with painstaking care, he coated his tongue. First the top, then the bottom, reaching as far back as he could without triggering his gag reflex. He worked the paste methodically onto the hard and soft palates of his mouth, and then the insides of his cheeks. This was the primary contact zone, the first line of defense, the very ground where the battle would be met. Finally, he came to the most delicate and challenging part of the ritual, the throat. Tilting his head back, he made a gentle, swallowing motion against an empty throat. A dry swallow intended to coat the upper portion of his esophagus. He knew he couldn't reach very far, but the ancient theory held that the protective message of the paste would extend further, carried on his breath and the sheer energy of the act itself. It was an act of faith as much as a physical application. The taste was exactly as he remembered from his training. It was earthy, with a profound bitterness from the potent herbs, followed by a chalky, mineral aftertaste from the termite dust. It was by no means a pleasant flavor, but to Bello, it was the taste of safety. It was the taste of a covenant made between man and a powerful, ancient force. He did not swallow the excess. Instead, he let it sit, forming a slick, insulating layer between his vulnerable flesh and the outside world. For the next hour, he remained in perfect stillness. He did not eat, he did not drink, and most importantly, he did not speak. He sat in quiet meditation, focusing his entire awareness on the sensation of the oil in his mouth. He could feel a subtle shift, a change in his own perception of that part of his body. His mouth felt separate now, slightly alien, as if it had been prepared and set apart. It was no longer just a part of him for eating and speaking. It had become a dedicated instrument, anointed and consecrated for a single, sacred purpose. He waited. The world outside his small home began to stir, but he remained a statue of patience. Then, the first rays of the sun breached the horizon, flooding his courtyard with a warm, golden light. It was the sign he had been waiting for. He stood up, his body feeling light and ready. The application was complete. The vessel was anointed. The dream permission sought in his restless sleep was secured. His breath was disciplined, his mind was clear. The temple of his body was empty and prepared. All that remained was to walk into the town square, to light the torch, and to prove, in front of the watching, believing eyes of his community, that the conversation between man and fire was not just a myth, not just a story told by elders around a flickering flame. He would show them that it was a lived, breathing, dazzling reality. The time for preparation was over. The time for performance had arrived. The day finally arrived, a day so heavy with anticipation it felt as though the air itself was holding its breath. Bello moved through his morning rituals with a quiet, contained energy. Every action was deliberate, every thought focused. There was no room for distraction, no space for the mundane anxieties of daily life. Today was different. Today he would dance with the flames. He chose his attire with care. Simple, clean robes of white cotton. The fabric was unadorned, a stark canvas against his dark skin. White, the color of purity, of beginnings, of light itself. It was a statement, a visual promise of the clarity and control he intended to bring to his art. As the fierce zenith sun began its slow, golden descent, casting long shadows across the land, Bello knew it was time. He made his way to the Kofa Mata Square. This wasn't just any public space. Kofa Mata was the beating heart of the city's cultural life, a vibrant, sprawling plaza that had, for generations, been the traditional gathering place for storytellers, musicians, and of course, the fire eaters. His ancestors had walked this same ground, their spirits perhaps still lingering in the dust motes that danced in the afternoon light. He did not announce his arrival with the clang of a bell or the thunder of a drum. There was no herald, no flamboyant call for attention. His entrance was his statement. The silent, purposeful stride of a man on a sacred mission. He carried a worn leather bag, its contents more precious than gold. Inside were his tools, the instruments of his dangerous orchestra, 2 torches meticulously prepared from tightly bound grass and soaked in resin. A simple flint and steel, the sparks of which held the potential for a blazing spectacle, and a small, unassuming clay pot. This pot was the most important of all. It cradled embers taken from his own hearth fire, the friendly water heater, the domestic flame that cooked his food and warmed his home. It was from this familiar, life-giving fire that the performance flames would be born. He found a clear space in the center of the dusty square. The ground was warm from the day's sun. He knelt, the white robes pooling around him, and began to lay out his items with a ritualistic care that hushed the air around him. Each object was placed with intention, creating a small, sacred circle on the earth. At first, only a few children noticed. Their games paused, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. They pointed and whispered to each other, their small voices carrying on the breeze. Slowly, like ripples in a pond, their curiosity spread. A circle began to form. It wasn't a shouting, clamoring crowd, but a quiet, respectful gathering. Men paused their animated conversations, their heads turning in unison. Women, laden with goods from the market stalls, stopped and shifted their baskets, their gazes fixed on the man in white. The ambient noise of the bustling square, the haggling, the laughter, the distant sounds of livestock seemed to soften, melting away until all that remained was a low, expectant hum. With the circle complete, with the eyes of the community upon him, Bello stood. His movements were fluid, unhurried. He took the small clay pot, the vessel of his home's spirit, and held it in his cupped hands. He blew gently on the embers within. A soft, orange glow pulsed in response, growing brighter with his breath until the coals were a vibrant, living red. He touched the tip of the first torch to the glowing embers. There was a soft whoosh as the resin-soaked grass caught, and a flame bloomed into existence. Burning clear and bright against the deepening blue of the sky, he held the single torch aloft, not as a weapon or a challenge, but as an offering. He turned slowly, presenting the flame to the 4 cardinal directions to the north, south, east, and west, a gesture of respect to the world and its unseen forces. Then, with the first flame burning steadily, he lit the second torch from the first. Now he held a fire in each hand, 2 pillars of light against the encroaching twilight. The symmetry was perfect, balanced. He began his performance not with the great heart-stopping feat that everyone had come to see, but with smaller, more intimate assurances. This was a dialogue, a conversation with the fire, and he wanted the audience to understand its language. He passed the flames slowly over his forearms, which gleamed with a thin layer of sacred, protective oil. The fire licked at his skin, a bright orange tongue tasting the surface. But it did not catch, it did not burn. The oils did their work, a visible shield that all could witness. This was the first lesson. Preparation and respect could command even the most destructive of elements. He brought one of the torches closer to his face, letting the intense heat wash over his skin. The crowd could see the waves of heat distorting the air around him. Yet his eyes remained soft, his expression calm, unblinking. He was demonstrating his familiarity, his deep personal relationship with the flame. He was not its master, but its partner. He was introducing the fire to the crowd, and just as importantly, introducing the crowd to the fire. This was not a monster to be feared, but a power to be understood. The circle of onlookers tightened, a collective, unconscious step forward. The sound of individual breathing seemed to merge into a single, synchronized rhythm, the collective breath of a community holding itself in suspense. This was no longer passive spectatorship. This was active participation. The audience's belief was not a given. It was a resource, a vital ingredient that he had to cultivate. Their focused attention, their willing suspension of disbelief, was creating a psychic container for the miracle that was to come. Their silent, shared faith became a second, invisible layer of oil, a communal energy that reinforced his own spiritual and physical preparation. It was an unspoken pact between performer and witness. In the profound hush of the Kofamata Square, under the vast, star-pricked African sky, a collective trance began to descend. It was a shared agreement, a silent consensus to witness the impossible. To believe that a man could indeed hold fire in his hands and command it with nothing more than his will and the community's trust. The performance had truly begun. The moment had finally arrived. All the preparations, all the quiet words, all the gathered hopes of the community now focused on this single point in time. The central fire roared, its flames leaping high into the cool night air, casting dancing shadows on the faces of everyone gathered. They formed a tight circle, a human wall of silent expectation. The energy was palpable, a thick, charged current that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of the quiet. Bello stood in the center, two torches held low in his hands. He raised his head and slowly scanned the ring of faces. He didn't just look at them, he looked into them. He met their eyes, one by one, for a fleeting, powerful second. It was more than just making contact. He was drawing something from them, their belief, their focus, their collective will. He was weaving their individual threads of faith into a single, strong rope inside himself. Then he took a deep, centering breath. It was a technique he had practiced for years, a cool, controlled intake of air that settled his nerves and sharpened his focus, pushing away the last vestiges of doubt. With a deliberate slowness that commanded attention, he began to move. He brought one of the torches up, holding it horizontally, the flame a bright orange tear dancing just inches from his lips. The quiet of the crowd deepened, becoming absolute. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, waiting. Bello tilted his head back, a slight, graceful inclination. His mouth opened, a dark O against the firelight. Then, with a smooth, practiced roll of his wrist, an elegant and fluid motion, he appeared to pour the living flame directly into his mouth. It wasn't a frantic gulp, not a desperate swallow. It was a reception, an acceptance. The flame vanished from the charred end of the torch, and in the very same instant, it bloomed to life inside the dark cavity of his mouth. For 3 long, agonizing, breathtaking seconds, the fire was there. It lived and danced behind his teeth, a contained, miniature sun. It illuminated his cheeks from within, casting a strange, almost hellish, yet beautiful glow that made his face a translucent mask of light and shadow. The crowd saw it. There was no trick of the light, no angle of deception. They saw the fire, raw and real, living inside a human mouth. A collective, silent shock rippled through the onlookers. Their faces were a gallery of raw emotion or fear, and a profound, childlike wonder. Then, just as the tension reached its breaking point, Bello acted again. With a controlled, steady exhale through carefully rounded lips, he released the fire. But it didn't emerge as it went in. It didn't pour back out as a neat, tidy flame. Instead, it erupted as a great, rolling plume of thick, white smoke. The smoke coiled and twisted into the night air, a ghostly serpent ascending towards the stars before it thinned and dissipated into nothingness. The torch in his hand, the one he had just emptied, was now extinguished. its end a blackened, smouldering tip. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the crackling central fire. Then the dam of silence broke. A collective gasp swept through the circle, a unified intake of breath, immediately followed by a roar. It wasn't just applause, not the polite clapping of a satisfied audience. It was a primal release of pent-up tension, a shout of shared triumph. The covenant, the promise they had all gathered to witness, had been made visible. The impossible had been performed right before their eyes. But Bello did not smile in victory. He didn't raise his arms in a triumphant gesture. His expression was one of profound gratitude, mixed with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He simply bowed his head slightly, a humble acknowledgement of the crowd and their essential role in the ritual. Their belief had held. Their unwavering, collective trance had created the stable ground, the unshakable foundation upon which this delicate, dangerous feat could stand. Without pausing for long, he moved to solidify the miracle. He took the extinguished torch and relit it from the flame of the second one he held. The crowd quieted again, watching his every move. He then repeated the act. Once more, he drew their belief into himself. Once more, he brought the flame to his lips. Once more, he took the fire inside, held it, and released it as a plume of smoke. He did it again, and then a fourth time, proving it was not a fluke, not a one-time trick of fortune. Each successful pass was another stone laid in the foundation of their shared reality, a testament to the triangle of power at play. His years of relentless preparation, the unwavering faith of the audience, and the fire's temporary, respectful compliance. As the final plume of smoke vanished, Bello finally lowered the torches. He stood straight, his chest rising and falling with the effort. A genuine, small smile touched his lips as he looked out at them once more. The faces looking back at him were no longer just filled with awe and fear. They were filled with hope. They had witnessed something that defied the ordinary rules of the world. And in doing so, they had been reminded that other impossible things might just be achievable too. The performance was over, but its echo, the memory of a man who held a star in his mouth, would linger in their hearts for a long, long time. This wasn't just about swallowing fire. It's about the delicate dance between belief, physics, and the power of a collective mind. Not every performance Bello gave was seamless. The covenant he shared with the fire, the sacred pact that protected him, was a fragile thing. Like a live wire strung taut between unwavering belief and the unyielding laws of physics. It demanded perfect focus, not just from him, but from everyone watching. Bello remembered a day, years ago, when he was still a young performer, still solidifying his reputation. A day that taught him this lesson with searing clarity. The sun was high and hot, beating down on the dusty market square. The circle of spectators had formed a vibrant mix of locals, traders, and travelers. He could feel their energy, a hum of anticipation that he had learned to draw upon, to weave into his own concentration. The circle included a group of Hausa traders, their faces familiar and full of respect. But among them, one face stood out, a Batara European merchant, a man with pale skin, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes filled with a sharp, skeptical curiosity. He wasn't there to believe. He was there to debunk. The performance had begun well. The drums set a hypnotic rhythm, and Bello moved with the fluid grace of a dancer. He twirled the torches, painting streaks of orange and red against the afternoon sky. The crowd was captivated, their individual thoughts merging into a single, shared focus. This was the ideal state, the collective trance that fortified his protection. The first swallow of fire was perfect. He drew the flame into his mouth, held it for a beat, and then exhaled a blossoming cloud of smoke. The crowd gasped, then applauded. The energy in the circle was strong, a palpable shield. But as Bello prepared for the second swallow, a subtle shift occurred. He heard the European merchant mutter something in a foreign tongue to his companion. The words were lost in the general noise of the market, but the tone was unmistakable. It was followed by a short, derisive laugh. Bello didn't need a translator to understand the sentiment. The man's posture, the curl of his lip, the dismissive wave of his hand, it all screamed the same thing. It est just a primitive trick. He probably has water in his mouth, or some other simple deception. It was a single drop of poison in a clear pool. A ripple of disturbance spread through the section of the crowd nearest to the man. Heads turned, whispers started. The unified focus, the collective trance he had so carefully built, fractured. It was as if a thread of doubt had been deliberately woven into the tapestry of their shared belief. At that exact, critical moment, as Bello brought the second torch flame to his lips, he felt it. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The usual sensation of a cool, slick, protective layer coating his mouth and throat seemed too thin to become almost non-existent. The fire, which had felt like a warm, harmless liquid just a moment before, now pricked his senses with a sharper, hotter, more aggressive edge. It was no longer a partner in a dance. It was an adversary. It felt as if the merchant's skepticism had traveled through the air, diluting the sacred oil that protected him, whispering directly to the fire, "He is vulnerable. He is just a man." Pain, sharp and real, licked the roof of his mouth. It wasn't a full-blown burn, not yet, but it was the clear, undeniable threat of one. The covenant, the sacred agreement, was fraying at the edges. Stretched to its breaking point by a single man's disbelief, panic was the most dangerous enemy in that moment. To jerk away, to spit out the flame, to show any sign of distress that would cause a real injury. Worse, it would shatter his mystique and confirm the merchant's cynical doubt, proving him right in the eyes of the crowd. Instead, Bello leaned into his years of brutal training, into the discipline that had been forged in him by his masters. He did not panic. He held his ground. He adjusted his plan in a split second. He exhaled the flame a half-second earlier than he normally would have, forcing it out with a controlled burst of air. The result was a plume of smoke and fire that was larger, more dramatic, and more spectacular than usual. It was a brilliant piece of showmanship, a calculated move to mask the flicker of pain that must have crossed his face and the internal crisis raging within him. The crowd, completely unaware of the near disaster, roared with approval. To them, this was the most impressive part of the show. Bello did not attempt a third pass with the fire. He knew the risk was too great. The connection was compromised. Instead, he moved immediately to his finale. With a grand, ceremonial flourish, he plunged both torches into a waiting bowl of sand, extinguishing the flames with a final hiss. He raised his arms, signaling the end of the performance. The applause was thunderous. From the outside, the performance was a resounding success. Coins rained into the collection bowl. But inside, Bello's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. His mouth throbbed with a phantom heat, a stark reminder of how close he had come to serious injury. He bowed to the crowd, his face a mask of calm composure, but his mind was racing. He had just experienced the most direct, tangible link between the crowd's faith and the fire's behavior. The merchant's doubt had not been a passive, internal opinion. It had been an active, dangerous force. It had projected out from him, momentarily breaking the spell, disrupting the shared energy, and empowering the flame's raw, destructive nature. It was the clearest and most painful proof he had ever received that what he did was no mere trick. A stage magician's trick works regardless of what the audience believes. A card is a card. A hidden compartment is a hidden compartment. But this was something else entirely. This was a collaborative ritual. Its success, his very safety, depended on a fragile, shared state of grace between him and his audience. He was the conductor, but they were the orchestra. The ripple of doubt from one skeptical man had taught him that the fire listened not just to his will and his training, but to the collective will of the entire circle. He realized in that moment that a master fire eater's greatest skill might not be in controlling the flame in his hand or his mouth, but in managing the delicate, invisible currents of faith and doubt that flowed through the crowd. After the crowd dispersed, the European merchant, the source of the disturbance, actually approached him. He tossed a few coins into the bowl, a patronizing smile on his face. "Very entertaining," he said, his voice laced with the same condescending amusement as his earlier laugh. "A clever bit of theatre." Bello simply met his gaze, nodded his thanks, and said nothing. There were no words he could offer that would bridge the chasm between what the man thought he saw and what had actually transpired. The proof was not in argument, but in the lingering, painful heat in his own mouth. That day changed him. It deepened his respect for the fire and for the ritual. He became more than just a performer. He became a guardian of the circle's belief, a shepherd of their collective focus. He learned to identify skeptics before they could speak, to use his showmanship not just to entertain, but to command and unify the attention of everyone present, building a fortress of faith around himself before ever bringing the flame to his lips. The fire had taught him its most profound lesson. It feeds not just on oil and air, but on the very spirit of those who watch it. Decades had passed, flowing like sand through an hourglass. Bello's hair, once a deep black, was now streaked with grey. His face lined not just with the passage of time, but with the memory of 1,000 swallowed suns. He had become a master, a Malami, revered throughout the land. Young men, their eyes wide with ambition and awe, sought him as a teacher. His performances were no longer simple street corner acts. They were events, drawing larger and larger circles of spectators, their collective gasp a wind that filled his sails. Yet, amidst the growing acclaim, he had begun to feel a subtle shift, a change in the very texture of his sacred covenant with the flame. The moment of revelation arrived during the annual festival of Ideal. The great square was packed, the energy electric, buzzing like 1,000 unseen insects. The collective belief of the crowd was a palpable force, strong, almost overwhelming. As Bello began the central act of his performance, the holding of the living flame in his mouth, something unprecedented occurred. For a fraction of a second, a sliver of time, less than the blink of an eye, he felt it. A pinpoint of searing heat on his lower lip. It was not the familiar, diffuse warmth of the compliant flame he had known for decades. This was a sharp, focused bite, like the sting of a hot needle. It was over almost before it began. With the discipline of a lifetime, he held his composure, exhaled the plume of fire smoothly, and finished the performance to a wave of thunderous acclaim. No one in the cheering crowd noticed a thing. But Bello knew the conversation had changed. Back in the cool solitude of his quiet courtyard, away from the adoring eyes of the multitude, he examined his lip in the reflection of a polished bronze mirror. And there it was, a tiny, perfect red dot, smaller than a single grain of millet. It wasn't a blister, not a burn in the conventional sense, but a clear, deliberate mark. It was a tickling from the fire, a whisper from the void. This was the first warning. In the ancient lore of his tradition, passed down from his own master, Malam Ibrahim, and from his master before him, this moment was known. The fire did not betray its keeper catastrophically. It didn't erupt in a sudden, vengeful inferno. It began to nibble. It gave a gentle, yet unmistakable sign. The covenant, so carefully woven from spirit, breath, special oil, and the unwavering belief of both performer and audience, was a living thing. And like all living things, it could age. It could fray at the edges. He pondered the reasons. Perhaps his own focus, once as sharp as a laser, had softened with age. Perhaps the faith of these modern crowds, though loud and enthusiastic, was not as deep or as pure as the faith of the villagers of his youth. It was a more superficial belief, a desire for spectacle rather than a true connection to the elemental power he wielded. Or perhaps it was something simpler, more fundamental. Perhaps the fire itself was simply reminding him of the natural order of the universe. That no conversation between a mortal man and the element of pure transformation can last a human lifetime without the element eventually asserting its fundamental nature. Fire, after all, is meant to burn. As he stood there, gently touching the tiny mark, Bello felt no fear. There was no panic, no sense of betrayal. Instead, a profound and solemn recognition washed over him, as peaceful as the evening call to prayer. The fire had been his most faithful partner for decades. It had given him his life, his purpose, his name, the respect of his community. It had fed his family and built his home. And now, it was politely clearing its throat. It was saying, in the only language it knew, "Our dialogue has been beautiful, old friend. But it is nearing its end." To ignore this whisper, to pretend he hadn't heard it, would be the height of human arrogance. It would be an insult to the very respect that had sustained the covenant for so long. He had danced with a powerful and ancient spirit, and that spirit was now signaling the end of the dance. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, what he had to do. The time was coming to pass the torch, before the fire decided to take it back. 1 week later, under the soft glow of a setting sun, Bello performed one last time. It wasn't in a grand arena filled with roaring crowds, but in the quiet intimacy of the village courtyard, surrounded only by the elders and his most devoted students. There was a hushed reverence in the air, a sense of an ending. The performance was flawless. Each movement was precise. Each flame a loyal partner in his dance. The fire didn't just lick his skin, it caressed it, a final, gentle farewell. He didn't need to utter the words, "I retire." The performance itself was the announcement, a poignant final chapter read and understood by those who knew the language of his art. It was his swan song, a perfect, quiet masterpiece. The following morning, the sun cast long shadows across the same courtyard where Malam Ibrahim had once mixed the sacred oils, the air still thick with memories. Bello gathered his students. On a clean, white cloth spread on the ground, he had laid out the tools of his art, the extensions of his own hands. There were his 2 favorite torches, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark from years of a firm, knowing grip. Beside them lay the flint and steel, the simple instruments that had birthed 1,000 fires. A small clay pot, which had held countless embers, sat empty, and next to it, the calabash, once brimming with the potent, secret oil, was now dry. These weren't just objects, they were relics, silent witnesses to a lifetime of dedication and danger. The students stood in a semicircle, their faces somber, their silence a testament to the weight of the moment. This wasn't a lesson, it was a ceremony. Bello looked at each of his students, his gaze lingering, filled with a teacher's pride and a father's love. Then, his voice, usually so strong and commanding, was soft, almost a whisper against the morning breeze. "The fire has spoken to me," he said, his words carrying a profound finality. He gently touched his upper lip where the faint scar remained. "It has tickled my lip. Our agreement is fulfilled." He didn't need to explain further. The students understood. They had all heard the stories, the warnings passed down through generations. A burn on the mouth was not a mistake. It was a message from the fire itself, a sign that the covenant between performer and flame was complete. They bowed their heads in unison, a gesture of respect, of understanding, of shared sorrow. They knew they were witnessing the end of an era. The great Bello, the master of flames, was laying down his crown. He then gave his instructions. His voice remained quiet but firm, guiding them through the steps of this final ritual. "Dig," he said, pointing to a specific spot in the courtyard. It was a place of balance, a sacred intersection that caught the first rays of the morning sun but was cooled by the afternoon shade. The students took up simple tools and began to break the earth. The soil was rich and dark, and soon a small, neat pit was formed. They worked together, their movements synchronized, a silent dance of labor and respect. Once the pit was deep enough, Bello handed them a piece of new, white cotton fabric. They carefully lined the hollowed earth with it, transforming the simple hole into a sanctified resting place, a cradle for the tools that had served him so faithfully. The ceremony continued with a quiet, deliberate pace. Bello knelt by the white cloth where his tools lay. He picked up the first torch, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of the handle. With a clean rag, he began to wipe away the years of accumulated soot, revealing the dark, polished wood beneath. He cleaned it with the care of a priest tending to a sacred artifact. He did the same with the second torch, then polished the flint and steel until they shone faintly in the morning light. He washed the small clay pot, rinsing away the last specks of ash, and then the calabash. This was not a simple act of cleaning. These were not being discarded as mere trash. This was an act of purification, a ritual of release. He was preparing them for their return, cleansing them of his own touch, his own sweat, his own history, so they could be given back to the earth, pure and unburdened. Each wipe, each polish was a silent thank you, a final goodbye to these extensions of his soul. Once every item was pristine, the most sacred part of the ritual began. Bello stood over the lined pit, holding his two torches. He took a deep breath, his eyes closing for a moment as if in prayer. Then, with a gentle, deliberate motion, he placed the torches into the pit, crossing them over each other in an X, the symbol of a completed journey, of a finished task. Next, he laid the polished flint and steel beside them, the creators of the spark now at rest. Finally, he placed the empty clay pot and the calabash at the head of the arrangement, like offerings at an altar, positioned as if watching over the other tools. The arrangement was beautiful in its simplicity, a stark, powerful tableau of a life's work laid to rest. The students watched, their hearts heavy, their breathing shallow, as if afraid to disturb the sanctity of the moment. With the tools arranged, Bello picked up a small gourd filled with clear water. He held it up to the sky for a moment before pouring a slow, steady stream over the items in the pit. The water was a libation, a cleansing offering to the spirits of the earth. It wasn't a fire-quenching act, but a life-giving one, a gesture of return. Then he reached for a small leather pouch. From it, he took a handful of reddish-brown earth. This wasn't just any soil. It was dust from the termite mound, the very same dust that had been a crucial, secret ingredient in his protective oil for so many years. He sprinkled this earth over the tools, a symbolic gesture of returning the magic to its source, of completing the cycle. The dust settled over the torches and pots, a final blessing from the natural world that had both protected and challenged him throughout his career. The final act was one of closure. Bello took the corners of the white cotton cloth that had been spread on the ground, and gently folded it over the tools in the pit, covering them completely. It was like tucking a child into bed for the last time. He smoothed the cloth, ensuring everything was covered. Then he stood up, brushed the dust from his knees, and gave a single, solemn nod to his students. It was their turn now. They understood the signal. One by one, they began to push the excavated earth back into the pit. The soil fell with soft thuds, a gentle percussion marking the end. They didn't rush. They worked carefully, respectfully, until the pit was filled. Then they used their hands and the flat of their shovels to smooth the surface, tamping it down until the ground was level once more, leaving no mound. No marker, only a patch of fresh, dark earth that blended seamlessly with the rest of the courtyard. What the students had just participated in was, in every sense, a funeral. But it wasn't for a person. It was a funeral for a chapter of life, for a unique and powerful relationship with the elemental world. It was a funeral for the persona of Bello, the Fire Eater. The tools, imbued with so much energy and history, were being returned to the earth from which their core materials, wood, stone, metal, clay, had originally come. Their purpose was fulfilled. Their journey was over. For Bello to sell them, or even to pass them on to his most promising student, would have been an act of profound disrespect. It would have meant ignoring the fire's personal warning, passing on a sacred covenant that had been officially and permanently closed. The burn on his lip wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. This burial was the ultimate act of integrity. It was his final, most respectful gesture to the spirit of the fire. A clear and unambiguous acknowledgement. With this act, he was saying, "I have heard you. I have listened. I understand that our time together is over. And with gratitude and respect, I now release what we've built together." The magic, the danger, the dance-it was all being returned to its source. The earth had reclaimed its own. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm light on the patch of fresh soil, a profound peace settled over the courtyard. The air, once thick with the scent of oil and soot, now smelled only of clean earth and new beginnings. Bello stood for a long time, looking at the spot, a quiet figure under the vast African sky. His hands were empty, but his spirit was full. The fire was no longer his partner, but it would forever be a part of his story. With the pit filled and the earth smoothed over, Bello's life as a fire eater was formally laid to rest. That chapter of his life, the one filled with roaring crowds and incandescent performances, was closed. Yet, his life with fire was far from over. It simply transmuted, changing its form, evolving into something new. He shed the skin of the performer and became, purely and solely, a Malamia teacher. His authority no longer sprang from the thrilling spectacle of active demonstration, but from the deep, quiet well of memory and wisdom. He was no longer the man who danced with flames, but the man who understood their language. His students still came, their eyes bright with ambition and curiosity, eager to learn the secrets of the Fire Eaters. They gathered in his courtyard, a place that once echoed with the crackle of practice fires, now filled with the hum of focused learning. And Bello, in his new role, held nothing back. He taught them everything. He explained the profound purpose of the 3-day fast, how it cleansed not just the body but the spirit, making it a worthy vessel for the conversation with fire. He guided them through the precise, rhythmic breaths of the Iskoki, the ancient technique that centered the mind and controlled the body's inner heat. He showed them how each inhale was a gathering of strength, each exhale a release of fear. He revealed the herbal components of the sacred oil, explaining the properties of each leaf and root. He showed them how to blend them, how to unlock their protective qualities. But one secret, the most vital of all, he kept guarded. The secret of the termite mound dust, the final, almost magical ingredient that completed the covenant, was entrusted only to his most promising and devoted student. The one he saw as the future, the one who would one day become the new master mixer and guardian of the tradition. He taught them the meditation on the dual nature of fire. He spoke of fire as a creator and a destroyer, a source of warmth and a force of annihilation. He taught them to hold both truths in their minds at once, to respect its power by understanding its capacity for both good and ill. He stressed the importance of the dream of embers, that crucial vision quest where a novice first meets the spirit of the flame, not in the physical world, but in the landscape of their own soul. It was a rite of passage, a necessary first step before any physical contact was ever attempted. He was a generous and thorough teacher, a living library of sacred knowledge. He demonstrated the breathing exercises, his eyes closed in deep concentration, his posture a testament to decades of discipline. His students mimicked him, their young faces etched with earnest effort, trying to capture the same stillness, the same inner focus. They absorbed his every word, practiced his every move. But eventually, the inevitable question would arise. It would come from a bold student, or perhaps whispered among a group before one was brave enough to voice it. "Master, show us." They wanted to see the legend in action. They wanted to witness the master swallow the flame one last time, to see the proof of all he taught. Every time they asked, Bello would simply shake his head. It was a gentle refusal, but behind it lay an unyielding finality. His eyes, which held the memory of 1,000 fires, would communicate a truth deeper than any words. "I cannot," he would say, his voice soft but firm. "The fire and I, we have finished our conversation. Our dialogue has concluded." He would pause, letting the weight of his words settle in the quiet air of the courtyard. If I were to call it now, to try and reignite that old bond, it would not be the friendly fire that answers. It would be the other one, the destructive one. My showing you would be a lie, an act of pride, and the fire would punish that lie. He would then gently touch the faint, almost invisible scar on his upper lip, the permanent reminder of his one and only mistake. "This is my proof," he would continue. "This is the mark of a broken promise. To perform now would be to break faith with my old partner, to disrespect the agreement we had. My role now is to help you start your own conversation with the fire, not to foolishly try and continue mine." And in this refusal, Bello taught his greatest, most poignant lesson, the wisdom of cessation. In a culture, like so many others, that revered perpetual strength and tireless endurance, Bello embodied a different, more subtle kind of power. It was the power to recognize an ending, the strength to honor a limit, the courage to step away. His students, in the end, learned more from his retirement than they ever could have from any flame he might have swallowed. They learned that the sacred covenant with fire was not about conquering the element forever. It was about engaging with it respectfully, honorably, for a season. And, most importantly, it was about having the humility and wisdom to step away when that season was over. He became a living bridge between the past and the future. The younger generation saw in him the embodiment of legendary feats, stories made real by his unwavering reputation and the awe they heard in their parents' voices. They heard from his own lips the detailed, practical knowledge, the science and spirituality of their art imparted with patience and care. And, crucially, they witnessed the sacred boundary he would not cross. He wasn't just a part of the tradition. He was the entire tradition personified. He represented its thrilling height, its meticulous science, and its solemn, necessary conclusion. Let's just pause for a moment and picture it. Bello's quiet courtyard. The air no longer carries the rich, sacred scent of performance oils. Instead, it smells of dry earth, sun-baked dust, and the simple aroma of brewing herbs. The only fire to be seen is the small, tame one used for heating tea. The great, roaring dialogues that once captivated the town square are now just echoes, memories held in the hearts of those who witnessed them. Yet, it is here, in this quiet, unassuming space, that the covenant is perhaps most perfectly honored. It is honored not in the spectacle, but in the restraint. It is honored in the act of teaching, in the careful preservation of knowledge for those who will come after. It's honored in the absolute refusal to cheapen the past by pretending the present is the same. The teacher who can no longer perform becomes the ultimate guardian of the tradition's truth. His refusal is the final lesson. It proves that the real magic was never in the trick itself. The magic was always in the sacred, bounded relationship that made the trick possible. It was in the respect, the discipline, and the profound understanding that all powerful things have their season, and all seasons must eventually come to an end. Bello, the Malami, the teacher, was now the truest fire eater of all, for he tended the most important flame, the one that ensures the story continues. The fire has burned down to coals in the brazier. The vast, star-strewn sky of Kano arches overhead, the same sky that has witnessed countless circles form and dissolve in the square below. The story of the fire eaters is complete, but its embers glow with a quiet, enduring truth. We began this journey together with an empty stomach and a full spirit, learning a fundamental lesson that to touch the impossible, you must first create a sacred, empty space within yourself. We witnessed the incredible alchemy of shea butter and secret dust, a kind of diplomacy of the senses that spoke to the fire in a language it could understand. We felt the electric weave of collective belief in the performance square, where the faith of an entire community became a tangible part of the protection. And we followed the master to that final, crucial moment, the whispered warning, the ceremonial burial of the tools and the wise. Transition to a new role as a teacher, one who holds the past, but lives in a present of respectful silence. The fire eaters of Kano didn't master fire. They mastered their relationship with fire. Their art was never about conquest. It was a profound, living metaphor for how to approach any great power. You don't approach it with arrogance, but with meticulous preparation. You don't seek to conquer it, but to form a covenant with it. And you don't engage in perpetual taking, but instead cultivate the grace to stop when that first, gentle warning arrives. Their performance wasn't just a spectacle. It was a prayer made visible, a temporary treaty signed between the human spirit and the elemental world. In our own lives, we all face our own kinds of flames, our passions, our challenges, our ambitions. The legacy of these remarkable adepts poses a series of questions to us. Do we approach our challenges with a cluttered spirit, full of ego and noise, or do we come to them with a prepared emptiness, ready to listen and learn? Do we try to shield ourselves with brute force and stubbornness? Or do we seek to truly understand the nature of the power we're dealing with so we can converse with it? And perhaps, most importantly, do we have the wisdom to listen for that gentle tickle on the lip, that subtle signal that a season is ending? And that the next sacred act isn't another performance, but a respectful, grateful retreat. So, as these last coals fade to ash, I hope you carry this cooling wisdom with you. True power isn't found in defying nature forever. It's found in dancing with it, respectfully, for a time, and in knowing, with perfect clarity, when the dance is done. The fire remains. The eater steps back, and the covenant, honored right to the very end, becomes a story told under a baobab tree, a lesson in the beautiful, temporary art of holding the sun in your mouth and knowing exactly when to let it go. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. You are now under baobab skies.